Welcome. This is Bill Donahue with Discerning Truths. Bill Donahue, Discerning Truths. Monday and Wednesday, we talk about Jesus. We're usually in a book. Right now, I'm in Matthew, and I'll be in Matthew until I finish Matthew, and then we'll pick another book. On Fridays, I usually teach subjects that are related to Christianity. Sometimes barely related to Christianity. You know, you're out there. This one might be one of those. And Fridays can be a little bit of a fun day. Because my friend Miguel California says I go off the rails. But it's fun. So if you're new here, I don't generally talk to the chat until I'm done. I did just see a message from an old friend, sort of Michael. Dude, I miss you. I'm glad to see you're in the chat. This is good. So with that, I want to get started. What we're talking about today, when I set up for our study, has to do with a number of subjects that actually tie together. And they're like little threads in a basket, right? And when you're looking at these threads and they start coming together, the question is, are they coming together because there's substance at that point they get together, or are they coming together because there's a common point of myth? And that's what we're looking at in the things. We're looking at relics, specifically the relic of the Holy Grail. And Joseph of Arimathea, who was he? I've done a whole stream on Joseph before, but legends around Joseph of Arimathea are very intricate to today's question. And then things called the Glastonbury Tales. And some of you may not have been familiar with the Glastonbury Tales, and I'll kind of fill you in. There's a lot of mythology around the Abbey at Glastonbury, England. Okay? And is that mythology fabricated? Is it based on fact? What are we dealing with, right? And it's funny because I tell people all the time, a lot of times my Friday streams come out of an email exchange. Somebody will send me a question. We'll talk about the question for a minute, and then it'll prompt an idea, and I'll do it. This study came out of a DM. And what was funny is the DM wasn't even about these subjects. It was about the formation of the New Testament canon. And a listener had sent me a video and said, tell me what you think. And it took me more than a week before I had time to listen to the video. And when I finally got there and had some time to set aside and listen, the guy was presenting a lot of good information, okay? Some of it was overstated. I really got the feeling he didn't say he was a King James only, but he was making the same kind of arguments they make, that God perfectly preserved his word and going through. So, some of that was getting me, but it was a pretty decent video. And then out of the blue almost, just in a passing comment, he inserted a reference about Joseph of Arimathea having founded the first church in England and building it there on a building, and that the Glastonbury Abbey in England was built on top of it. And of course, he didn't explain that this is legend that developed many centuries later, right? He presented it like facts. He was doing a factual study on the New Testament canon, and he just threw this in there. And if he believes it's fact, then totally understand him doing that. If he believes it's mythology, probably didn't belong in that place, right? So, but that caught me, and that got me thinking that this might be a worthwhile thing. So typically the Holy Grail, what's talked about, most people when they speak of the Holy Grail are talking about the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper, okay? And now is this actually the cup Jesus used? Or are the Holy Grail legends and stuff an entire story built on a medieval fan fiction? One line in a ambiguous 12th century French romantic poem. Is that really what this is on? But if we start with this, it could be the actual cup. But more recently, people have started saying that it's a metaphor for the offspring of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Okay? There was a book that came out called Holy Blood, Holy Grail, rocked the church in the 70s. And then the Da Vinci Code claims, they all claim this idea that this is the biggest conspiracy theory in history, and Jesus and Mary Magdalene had some kids, and those kids their descendants are still alive on the earth, and the Knights Templar and the church have covered it up, and so that's what the Grail is, that bloodline, that preserved bloodline. So you get kind of two stories there. And then, but there's a legend that developed that Joseph of Arimathea brought the cup Jesus used at the Last Supper to England. Now, one of the stories says that he collected in that cup the blood that Jesus shed on the cross. And so he had a cup full of his blood in the cup that he actually used, and he traveled to Britain with that. So that's kind of as the Grail legends developed, that's what was going on. So the question is there any evidence that Jesus traveled to Britain with his uncle or possibly great uncle, right? Some people think Joseph of Arimathea was Mary's uncle. One source says it was Mary's second husband, but most of them are going to say it's her uncle, so that's Jesus's great uncle, right? And they think that Joseph, the stepdad of Jesus, because he's never mentioned in the Bible after Jesus being 12 years old and they lose him and Jesus is in the temple teaching. Joseph never appears again. So they think that he may have died. Jesus and Mary would have needed a family member to take care of them. And according to this theory, the rich Joseph of Arimathea was that family member. And they also speculate that Joseph of Arimathea was the minister of mining for the Roman Empire. Not only was he in the Sanhedrin and one of the richest men in Jerusalem, but the reason he's rich is he was doing the tin mining for the Roman Empire in England. Okay? Now, like I said, if you want to go back and find my stream on Joseph of Arimathea, I get into those a little bit deeper, but I'm just kind of give you some background. So, with that understanding, did Joseph and Jesus build a home for them to use in their travels? Because when they went up to England in the area of the tin mines, and then they built it in and around Glastonbury, England. And it was the first above ground church that was a separate building used for church functions after the death of Jesus, actually in England. Okay, this is the claim. And is the Glastonbury Abbey built on the site of that original church? So for me, the best place to start is with Scripture, right? If you start with Scripture, it's kind of hard to go wrong, in my opinion. So we're going to start out there and see what the Scripture says about this cup, right? Matthew 26:27-28 says, "And he," this being Jesus, "took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, 'Drink of it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" And we've just talked about the Passover Seder. I'm doing Matthew right now. And we know this is the third cup in the Seder meal. It's called the cup of redemption, and it's based on the third promise in Exodus 6, 7, and 8. I'm drawing a blank on the verse right now, but there's 4 promises in Exodus. I think it's chapter 7, verses 6 and 7, but I'm getting a verse tongue-tied in my head. And it's the third promise. It's the third cup. It's part of the Passover Seder meal. And Mark says basically the same thing. "And he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them. They all drank it, and he said to them, 'This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many.'" Luke 22:20 says, "And likewise the cup after they had eaten, saying, 'This cup is poured out for you, is the new covenant of my blood.'" And 1 Corinthians 11:25 says, "In the same way, he also took the cup after supper, saying, 'This is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me.'" There is no mention in Scripture of the cup being kept or being special. It's symbolic, right? Meaning is the wine within the cup, not the cup itself, right? I mean, the symbolism here is the wine. The wine is the blood of the symbolic of his blood, not the cup, you know. And you say, okay, well, the cup's symbolic of Jesus because it contains his blood. Maybe, but there's no mention in Scripture of anything special about this cup. Now, the New Testament doesn't even hint at a romantic relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene. That myth that she bore a child or children, depends on which story you read, with Jesus and his bloodline still exists on earth today, is probably worthy of its own stream debunking it. But just briefly, the idea of a romantic or marital relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene potentially leading to descendants does not explicitly appear in any ancient text based on cross-verified historical and literary evidence from credible sources. I searched everywhere for it. The New Testament gospel portrays Mary Magdalene as a devoted disciple and witness to the crucifixion and resurrection, but with no implication of a romance or a marriage. Interpretations suggesting a closer, possibly intimate relationship originate from selective readings in Gnostic texts. Now, Gnostic texts are ancient, and I just told you there's no ancient records to this because these ancient texts don't actually say this, right? Now, Gnostic texts, like the Nag Hammadi library, is a bunch of Gnostic texts, okay, and other codices. The texts emphasize Mary Magdalene's spiritual prominence. She definitely plays a bigger role in Gnostic texts than she does in Christian texts, right? And she's seen as favored in a favorable status among other disciples. In fact, at one point, it looks like Peter's jealous of her in her status and in the way the Gnostics did it. Now, some 20th century feminists theology and pseudo-historical works have extrapolated and imply a romance, but the old text never says it. And that's what I'm saying is, it's not actually in the old text. There are some more modern writers who are trying to push a feminist ideology and that have asserted it, but when you go check the actual text, it's not there. Now, scholars generally view this as an anachronistic interpretation, that it's a one of a kind. They're making up their own interpretation. It's not that the language reflects standard Gnostic themes of spiritual union and knowledge transmission rather than physical or sexual intimacy. And again, no ancient source mentions Jesus and Mary Magdalene having children. None. So if you are wondering, did we take that information out of the Bible? It's not found anywhere until you get to recent days, right? Now, certain Gnostic texts do give Mary Magdalene a more prominent role, okay? Some give her a bad role, right? But normally they give her a better role. The Gospel of Philip, right? Now, this is mid-2nd century to early 3rd century AD, so it's pretty early. And they've found a significantly intact Coptic version in the Nag Hammadi collection, and it mentioned Mary Magdalene as Jesus's companion, right? But when you look up the Coptic word, it means partner or associate in the spiritual sense, and describes kissing, which is Gnostic context, symbolizes the exchange of divine knowledge rather than eroticism. As explained in the text itself, explains that to you. For it is by a kiss that the perfect conceive and give birth. For this reason, we also kiss one another. We receive conception from the grace which is in one another. So the Gnostics were kissing each other to pass on spiritual grace. This is not about, it says Jesus kissed Mary Magdalene, that must mean they're in a romantic relationship. You have to read things in the context they are given, right? And if you're reading Gnostic text, you got to read them in the context of Gnostic theology. The Gospel of Mary, again, early, mid-2nd century. And then again, we have a Coptic manuscript as part of the Berlin Codex, which is in the 5th century AD. So what we're looking at is we have a 5th century copy, but they believe the text goes back to the mid-2nd century. Mary Magdalene as receiving exclusive revelation from Jesus, okay? Provoking jealousy among male disciples like Peter. And you're going to see that jealousy also shows up in the Gospel of Thomas, right? It implies a special spiritual bond, but no romance or marriage, okay? And then Pistis Sophia, and Sophia means wisdom, right? And it's 3rd or 4th century AD. Again, Coptic manuscript in the Askew Codex is from the late 4th century, but they think that's a copy of an earlier one, and what I'm telling you. And it features Mary Magdalene prominently as an insightful questioner and interpreter of Jesus' teaching on cosmology and salvation. So in this book, Mary's reinterpreting what Jesus says to fit Gnostic theology, okay? And Jesus praises her spiritual acuity, implying a favored role, but there's not even a hint of a romantic element here in these texts. But 20th century writers have inserted that in there where it doesn't exist. And I mentioned the Gospel of Thomas, and I didn't put it in my notes, but I'm just let you know. There's in the Gospel of Thomas, Peter starts arguing that Mary shouldn't be with them with the other disciples because she's a woman, and women are stupid, right? He really is putting her down. And she's never going to be saved because she's a woman, and only men can go to heaven. Now, this doesn't sound like anything Peter would say, but they put it in there, and then Jesus promises Mary that he's going to turn her into a man so she can go to heaven. So if you think the Gospel of Thomas is a legitimate source, you and I are on two different planes here, right? But that's what Gnosticism, that was the Gnostic text, okay? So the claim of a holy bloodline from Jesus, that it's still extant on the earth, living descendants, it's not supported by any ancient or medieval sources. Evidence is absent from the primary historical records, and the idea is a modern fabrication. Do you hear me? This is something somebody made up recently. The oldest known source for this information is a set of documents that we know were forged. The Dossier Secrets de Henry Louvenot, okay? And this is the pseudo-historical genealogy in the documents, okay, and deposited in the Bibliothèque Nationale of France between 1964 and 1967 by Pierre Plantard. Now, Pierre Plantard has been convicted of fraud in France, okay? He founded a hoax organization called the Priory of Sion. You might hear the Priory of Sion if you listen to any of these fringe streamers, right? In 1956, to promote his own claim to the throne, that he was the legal heir and to the throne in France. So he forged documents, stuck them in the official records, and then went and found those documents to prove that he was really legitimately the king. Okay? So this is where this idea starts from a known fraud, right? And then these documents that he has, he claims they're coming from Merovingian kings from the 5th to the 8th century, that they descended from Jesus and Mary Magdalene via the alleged offspring, and who fled to France with the bloodline and preserved. So the story is that, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, Joseph of Arimathea, that they're not welcome in Jerusalem post-resurrection because they're, the Jews want them out of there. And they put them in a boat with no oars. They send them out to sea, and they're just floating out there expecting to die, but they get picked up by a ship. And because Joseph, who he is, they get taken along. And Mary Magdalene gets off in France and lives there, and then she ends up moving into a cave. Okay? But she's pregnant on this trip, and that she has her child. But some people think she only has one child, and some story says she has multiple children with Jesus, right? This idea was popularized in the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail by Michael Bagnat, Richard Lay, and Henry Lincoln. And this, like I said, it was, I believe, the 70s when I first read this, and it was shocking the church. There's a lot of what appears to be factual history in Holy Blood, Holy Grail, mixed in with mythology around the Templars and this mythology, and it's blend together. But they explicitly rely on the forgeries from Plantar in the book. Okay, so this guy planted documents that are known forgeries. The authors pick up on those forgeries, repeat them as fact, because they believed Holy Blood, Holy Grail is actual history. They're saying it might be a fictionalized account of history, but it's historic. Like The Chosen might have some fictional elements in it, but it's about a real person, Jesus, in his life, right? That's their position of what the Holy Blood, Holy Grail is. And then, but when you look at other scholars that have looked at their evidence that are in that book, they all say this is pseudo history, and it's garbage. And I gave you a list here. Jason Colavito on Henry Sinclair and the Knights Templar and the Holy Bloodline of Chronology. Elliot Miller is from the Christian Research Institute, right? Holy Blood, Holy Grail. and Richard Abney's The Truth Behind the Da Vinci Code, Harvest House Publishers, 2004. These ones, the last one is more about the Da Vinci Code, but Da Vinci Code wholesale ripped off Holy Blood, Holy Grail, right? And to the point that they got sued by the authors for doing it and their storyline. And I gave you those references, so if you want to go in a deeper study to see that that is absolutely bunk, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, the Da Vinci Code, and it goes back to Plantard, and they debunk those things in a more in-depth thing that I'm going to do in the study. Those are your sources to start with. Now, earlier medieval legends, 12th to 13th century tales of Mary Magdalene landing in Camargue region of France and evangelizing the area before she retires to a cave in Massif de la Sainte-Baume for a life of penance. And Jacob de Warren's Golden Legend in 1260 AD alleges that to be the case. But in his story, there's no baby, there's no bloodline. So the original story of Mary getting to France comes from a medieval fiction, right? But even that doesn't mention the baby. Now, I know I said I would briefly go over that stuff, but I wanted to provide you enough scholarly sources to refute this nonsense that there is bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene walking the earth today. This is complete garbage, okay? And that's what the Holy Grail is the bloodline, and that they are represented in certain families in Europe and stuff. It's just not there. Any author, streamer, movie maker pushing this narrative has proven by the fact they're pushing it that either they haven't bothered to do even a minimal amount of historical research, or they are knowingly presenting a demonstrably false information. That's your choices. This is not, we looked at the evidence and we came to two different conclusions. This is so clearly false that I'm telling you, anybody that's promoting it is either ignorant of the truth or they're just a liar. That's your two choices. There is not any evidence to support what they're saying about that. Now, other than the Bible, a lot of what we learn about the Last Supper and a lot of our imagery comes from Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting. Now, you usually see in a better colorized version of this, right? I took a picture of the actual painting, and I thought that was better. It's faded out, right? Now, do you really think when they got together in the upper room that Jesus and the 12 disciples all got on one side of the table for the photo op? No. This is an artistic interpretation, right, by Leonardo da Vinci. And, you know, you're on there and there's no special cup on the table. There's not some like silver or golden chalice that's being here. It's just, but that's his interpretation. We saw no mention of it earlier. So what is the Holy Grail? If it's not the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, what is it? And the first appearance of the idea that it's the cup used by Jesus at the Last Supper is in a book called Percival, The Story of the Grail. And it's a, I use these, but I can't pronounce these words. Chivalric romance poem. Okay, it's about chivalry. Okay, it's a French romance. Okay, and it's by Crétin de Troyes, and it's from about 1180 A.D. First time this idea ever comes up with. And what I want you to understand is the French romance genre is fiction, not nonfiction. It's fiction. It's stories about chivalry and bravery and fighting dragons and fighting people that are unethical and doing that. And when first described by Crétin, the marvelous nature of the Grail is mysteriously explained in the book, but simply labeled with the word un Grail, meaning a wide dish. It's got a girl presenting it, which looks like a wide dish in the thing, and he calls it un Grail, but he never explains what it is. But that's the first time it shows up. And then the book Joseph of Arimathea, called Grand Saint Grail by Robert de Boron, and I want you to pay attention to his name, Robert de Boron. He's a game changer in the Grail mythology. So he's 1191 to 1200 AD. And it's the first Arthurian text to account for Christian origins of the Holy Grail. The story of Joseph of Arimathea, who rescued Christ's body from the cross, is the primary focus of this text, which is the first text to recount how the Grail got to Britain. So this guy, also writing fiction, created a story, intrigue story about how Joseph of Arimathea got the Grail out of the country and got it to England, right? This is the first time the Grail is explicitly called the Last Supper cup. So Boron does that. And he claimed that Joseph of Arimathea caught the blood in the cup after the crucifixion. So he went up and drained Jesus' blood into the cup, and then he took that cup to Glastonbury, Britain. All of these ideas originate with Robert de Boron, 1191 to 1200 AD. Boron also claims that he got this information from a great book given to him by God, okay? But no such book has ever been produced, okay? So here's a guy, he got direct revelation from God about this. This is like the guy writing a Passion translation of the Bible, right? He got a book right off the library, and God went to heaven, and God gave him a book off the library. He could have made up the story of the great book, but he framed it as lost to history, right? I mean, doesn't that make sense to you? If you're going to make up this story, and you say, I got this book, this great book from God, but somehow I lost it. It's just been lost in history. But you have a story that its lack of proof is its proof, right? I have no evidence to back up what I'm saying, but you need to trust me. So, like I said, the quote from this book says exactly, Joseph collected the blood in the vessel in which Christ had supped. So that's where they get an idea they collect Jesus' blood in this Holy Grail blood. Now, in his book, Boron claims that Jesus used that cup at the Last Supper, that Joseph used it again to catch the blood on the cross. Joseph was in prison and sustained by the Grail. They put him in prison, but let him keep his cup full of Jesus' blood, and that kept him alive in jail. And that Joseph eventually sails to Britain, bringing the cup with him. Okay? Now, after Boron had written his Grail history, the legends of Joseph of Arimathea were popularized in both romance and history. Okay? Now, these are La Histoire du Grail, the history of the Grail, by William of Malmesbury. And then you have, I'm going to deal with the antiquity, the ecclesiastical history of Glastonbury Abbey. I'm going to return to the Glastonbury Tales later. But I want you to see that what we're looking at is a myth that was basically created. There's one line from a poem of which Boron builds on and creates this entire myth about the Grail. And it's all done in old French romances, right? They're romance novels, okay, that become Arthurian novels and take on a branch, a very British nature later. Sorry, I just deleted something I needed. So the Holy Grail legends then, right? So you develop from this poem by Troyes, And then Robert de Boron just elaborates them big time. And then they go through what's called the Vulgate cycle. And the Vulgate cycle is a large amount of books that were produced by French Cistercian monks between 1210 and 1230. I mean, they were putting these books were selling like hotcakes. They produced them like crazy. They detail stories of King Arthur, the Round Table, the quest for the Holy Grail, and becoming the most influential version of these legends before Mallory. Mallory is going to be another author that we talk about, introducing key figures like Prince Galahad and weaving together biblical history and the chivalric romance. And then Wolfram von Eichenbach's connection to the Holy Grail is through his epic poem Parzival, in which he presents a unique version of the Grail legend, portraying the Grail as a mystical, life-sustaining stone, not a cup. The stone, the Holy Grail in his poem, is guarded by a knightly order. Okay, and I can't pronounce this, but just understand when it talks about him as being temple scene, these are Knights Templar. That Monsalvaki, whatever, is an order of the Knights Templar. So that's where this idea that the Knights Templar, they were protecting this stone. Okay? And it blends stories of the Templars guarding the stone, the Holy Grail, with stories of chivalry and spiritual quests, alchemy even, and Crusader era themes. Very popular genre of fiction, okay, in the Middle Ages. Then Sir Thomas Malory, that's who does La Muerte de Arthur, the death of Arthur, right? Specifically in the sections dealing with the Knights of the Round Table, spiritual quests for the mystical Holy Grail, it became a profound central part of the Arthurian legends, okay? And where purity is personified by Galahad, Prince Galahad, triumphs over the worldly flaws that are personified in Lancelot, highlighting themes of sin and redemption and divine grace, all compiled by Malory in medieval French romances. These are called romance novels. They're not love stories, and you think of romances. What it is that's the genre. Malory's version synthesized earlier medieval French romances. Then, by adding his understanding of chivalry and warfare, he transformed the stories into a distinctively English story. King Arthur being English, right? The Knights of the Round Table, English. He shifted these over into a distinctively English story. But in Malory's version, the Holy Grail isn't a cup. It symbolizes spiritual truth, enlightenment, divine power, and effectiveness tied to the spiritual state of those nearby. You're in search of the Holy Grail. You're in search of spiritual truth and enlightenment and divine power. It's a metaphor, right? What started as medieval French romances became English Arthurian romance novels. Both genres are fiction, not history, right? I mean, when you go and you watch movies like Avatar, right? And they came, what was their planet they were from? Pandora. Should we believe that there's a planet Pandora out in space because it was in a fiction book and movie? When C.S. Lewis writes tons of Christian literature, fiction. Should we think it's real? This is really what we're coming down to. Then along comes the authors of this book I told you in the 70s, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Banchett, Lay, and Lincoln. And 82, I guess, is the date. I thought it was earlier than that. My memory, it was the 70s, but I'll go with my research I did. It was 82. And they presented their work as speculative but non-fiction. Absolutely true. Some speculation on how things went together, but everything else was true. And the Holy Grail was actually Jesus' bloodline. They treated these medieval French romance and English Arthurian romance novels as nonfiction. They took books from two genres that are both fiction and treated them like they're nonfiction. Does that sound like good history? They added in some Knights Templar lore and presented an alternative history and presented the greatest conspiracy theory ever about the hiding of the bloodline of the descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Critics and historians have widely dismissed it as pseudo-history and hoaxes, but these authors defended it as factual, albeit speculative, account. They even sued Dan Brown for using its architecture in the Da Vinci Code and claiming it was not fiction, but a real story. This is interesting. Dan Brown absolutely wholesale ripped off their material. It wasn't even funny in his story. And they would have probably been more successful if they charged him with plagiarism, because I mean he took their stuff and ran with it. But they charged him and said no, his problem was that our stuff is fact, and he wrote a book and admitted it was fiction. He hurt our credibility. Okay? Now Dan Brown admitted that the book and the subsequent movie, the Da Vinci Code, were fiction. But he also claimed that 99% of the historical background, the art, the architecture, the secret rituals, all that stuff, the Templar history, that was factually inaccurate. So now I got two sets of authors, Dan Brown and the earlier authors from Holy Blood, Holy Grail, that claim that these stories that originated in medieval French and English fiction are fact. And like I said, historians have taken Dan Brown to task, showing that his historical claims are false, misleading, and sometimes hoaxes. He presented the novel as fiction, but laced it with fictional interpretations of history, leading to major confusion about what was and was not real. This is the problem. It's why I've never been a big fan of Christian fiction or fiction about real people, because it messes up what's real and what's not real. Okay, what's actual history and what are you making up here? Now the church is not innocent in this game. Okay, for reasons that are unknown to me. All my research, I can't figure out from the life of me how this happened. Many people in the church became fascinated with holy relics. You might be able to build a boat if you collected all the wood in all the churches around the world that says it's part of the cross of Christ. Okay? Now, the mother of Constantine did find a piece of wood she claimed was the cross of Christ and divided it up and sent it to churches. But I'm telling you, the amount of wood that's out there right now, you could probably build a boat with. Was some of it from the cross of Christ? Maybe. Is all of it? Absolutely not possible. Right? And then other churches would keep stuff like bones of people they considered holy, or other artifacts, what are called holy relics. I don't get the holy relic thing at all. I just don't see it. Now, some Christian holy relics include items that are supposedly from the life of Jesus. The Shroud of Turin, the Crown of Thorns, the Holy Lance, the true cross fragments, right, of which I just told you. Now, the Shroud of Turin intrigues me only because I haven't seen a legitimate way to explain its existence. It could or could not be real. I still don't see the venerating it as a holy relic, and that's where I'm at. They also include physical remains and possessions of saints, such as bodies of saints, John the Baptist's head, St. Peter's bones, Mary Magdalene's skull, or St. Generis's blood. Okay? All of these, and I don't know that it's legitimately Mary Magdalene's head, but you can go to the cathedral and they have it stored there. And people claim to have Peter's bones and to do stuff. So, this is this relic trade became a huge thing in the church. And some relics are first-class relics, right? Like physical remains from direct contact, like the shroud. That's a first-class relic. And second class is objects that were touched or used by followers, right? and some are venerated as some Christians as powerful symbols of the faith. Somebody that was lived to be a very holy man in their life. They keep his bones as a relic. Okay, so just because something's called a holy relic doesn't mean that it is either actually a relic or anything. It could be just something used by a church to gain notoriety and money and fame. And other claim relics could be actually legitimate historical artifacts, but it doesn't make they have special power to heal or do any of that stuff. I don't get this whole idea of these holy relics is something that just boggles my mind. Now, the first cup that the church has venerated as the Holy Grail is the Valencia chalice. It's in the Valencia Cathedral. It's a cup that some people believe, not that it's been tested, some people believe to the first century, though the elaborate dedicated base and the handles were added later. Okay? But the first time this shows up in history, it's in an inventory being done in a abbey in San Juan de la Peña monastery, and they wrote it down on their inventory as the cup used by Christ. First time it shows up in history. Went over 1,000 years, dead silence. Somebody found it in their inventory. Now, recent 2020 studies of the earliest parts of the Valencia chalice, they think date to 100 to 200 years after Christ. So it is, the original cup is very old. Gets very close to the date of Christ. 100 to 200 years in scientific testing is pretty close. Another claimed candidate for the Holy Grail is housed in Genoa, Italy, the Sant'Anno Castino. It's a green hexagonal dish, right? More in line with what was originally in the poem. It was originally thought to be emerald, just a big emerald dish, phenomenally expensive. But 19th century testing showed it's actually glass. So probably not the actual Grail, but it's still venerated in that church as the Holy Grail used by Christ. The next one, this is going to go with your Raiders of the Lost Ark people, is called the Non-Theos Cup. It's a wooden bowl. It's now in fragments, but the original legend was that if you put and drank from this before it got broke, you drank from it, it would heal you. Right? This is legendary stories about these cups. And then the last one, that's the churches, different churches have claimed as the Holy Grail, is this cup called the Antioch chalice. And it's a silver chalice. It's been dated to 500 to 600 AD, so probably not early enough to be the Holy Grail, but they still present this out as the cup used by Jesus. Okay? Now, they've done a lot of digging around Jerusalem. It's a very active archaeological site, and they have found a lot of pottery, including cups from the first century, and they mostly look like this, right? Now, this one they reassembled. You can see it was broken, and somebody put it back together. And so you have that it was standard to use cups like this. There's no record of anybody preserving the cup from the Last Supper, right? Even though we have ample accounts of other things being preserved and considered holy relics earlier, we don't have anything. I mean, the Shroud of Turin, the idea of an image on a cross shows up way earlier than the first image or the first claim of the cup of Jesus. Okay? And I told you I won't get done in an hour. I have a lot of slides. I'm going to do my best. Just hang with me if you can. And I'm just telling you, it's possible for things to happen in history and there be no record of it. There are no ancient historical records outside the Bible of the whereabouts of Jesus from the age of 12 to 30, right? He was clearly somewhere, right? So this absence in the Bible has led to wild speculations. Some people say he went to Britain, India, China, Egypt, North America. I can't remember all other places that people have claimed he's gone. But the Bible indicates that Jesus lived in Nazareth until he went into ministry, and then he moved to Capernaum. And Luke 2:39, after fulfilling the purification rites required under the law, that's the purification of Jesus, they returned to Galilee, to their own town of Nazareth. Clearly establishes Nazareth as the town of Mary and Joseph. Matthew 2:23, following the return from Egypt after Herod's death. Remember, they flew from Bethlehem to Egypt. God get them out of town, and then after Herod dies, they come back. And Matthew 2:23 tells you that they went back and lived in a town called Nazareth, right? And Luke 2:51, describing an event in Jesus' youth, the text states, then he went down to Nazareth with them, Mary and Joseph, and was obedient to them. This indicates that at least for a period of time, Jesus was living in Nazareth, right? Now, does it say absolutely that he lived in Nazareth unbroken for 30 years? It's hinted at, but it's not actually stated. I'm going to continue. In Matthew 13:55 and 56, and you have a very similar passage in Mark 6:3, when Jesus taught in his hometown synagogue, the people there expressed their astonishment by referencing his immediate family who still lived in their community. This is when they say, isn't he, this is the son of the carpenter, and, don't we know his brothers and sisters, right? And, isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother named Mary? Aren't his brothers James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? Aren't all his sisters here with us? That indicates that when he's teaching in Nazareth, his entire family's still there, and he is well known. They're well known in the community. Luke 4:16-30 confirms the location of this event as Nazareth. These questions imply that Jesus' mother, siblings were well-known residents of Nazareth at the time that he was entering ministry. In Mark 1:9, it says, in those days, Jesus came from Nazareth of Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. What starts the ministry of Jesus? When he's baptized by John. He came from Nazareth. He didn't come from Britain or India or Egypt, right? In John 1:46, it says this verse alludes to the perception of Nazareth as an insignificant place within Nathanael, when Nathanael asked, can anything good come out of Nazareth? If Jesus didn't come from Nazareth, what's the point of this? Right? It supports the idea that him and his family are associated with Nazareth. In John 2:12, again after the miracle at Cana, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and his brothers and his disciples, grouping his mothers and brothers as a single traveling unit, likely from their home base in Nazareth. Right? They traveled from Nazareth to Galilee as a group. Nazareth to Capernaum as a group. You wouldn't be starting in Nazareth if you didn't live in Nazareth, right? So the previous passages consistently portray Nazareth as a permanent residence in the hometown of Jesus and his family members. But Scripture indicates that Jesus moved from Nazareth to Capernaum at the time he was entering ministry. And that's in Matthew 4:13. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali. And Mark 1:21-29, and I abbreviate it, describes Jesus entering Capernaum synagogue, teaching with authority, healing, and then going to Peter's house, showing it as his base. And Matthew 8:14 mentions Jesus entering Peter's house in Capernaum to heal Peter's mother-in-law. And Matthew 9:1 states, and getting into the boat, he crossed to the other side and came to his own city, which is understood to be Capernaum. Nazareth is not on the other side of the lake. Okay? So all of these texts consistently in the Bible indicate that Jesus lived his life in Nazareth until he went into ministry. There is no hint that he lived in other places like Britain. or Egypt or India or North America. The Bible makes no mention of the stepfather of Jesus, that Joseph, dying when Jesus was young, thereby leaving Mary and Jesus to become wards of Joseph of Arimathea. However, prominent proponents claim that there are hints in Scripture and other non-canonical texts which support this idea. They claim that we know of a potential relationship through ancient tradition and text, not the Bible itself. And I told you, books don't have to be in the Bible to be important or to be accurate. They claim the text says that Joseph of Arimathea was Mary's uncle. Her father, Joachim, and Jews believe Mary's parents were Joachim and Anna, okay, making him Jesus' great uncle, and the family elder who could claim Jesus' body after the crucifixion, a right usually reserved for a next of kin. This claim that only a next of kin can retrieve the body is common in their arguments. And that since Joseph did it, therefore he must have been a next of kin. So I traced down these sources. You know me, you get one nerd friend that'll chase down sources and figure out where they're at. And they usually say the Talmud says and doesn't give me like a passage to look for, right? And they widely claim, but I searched the Talmud on an electronic version and searched for every option of that a statement making that claim, and there's no such reference that I could find. If someone finds a reference and you want to give me the actual citation where in the Talmud it says that Mary or that Joseph of Arimathea is Mary's uncle, I'll look it up. But I did like Google search through the Talmud, with that kind of search level, and every search criteria I could think of, and I couldn't find any. Okay? It also claimed medieval genealogies depict him as Mary's uncle, and sometimes uncle becoming her husband, Joseph. So this is a kind of weird twist. Some of these stories claim that Joseph of Arimathea actually married Mary, his niece, after Joseph, the stepfather, dies. And I was looking for sources of that, and what did I find? The History of the Grail. By who? Robert de Boron. Remember that name? He wrote medieval French romance novels, fiction novels. By Robert Boron is where this idea gets started. It's claimed that the early church father Epiphanius, it says that Joseph of Arimathea took Mary as his wife when her first husband Joseph died. Would that, if true, is a great source because he's a very early church father, right? But I did an exhaustive search of his writings, and no such quote exists. In fact, in Panarion Against Heresies, and I give you the reference here, says Joseph begat James when he was somewhere around 40 years old. After him he had a son named Josie, and then Simeon, and after him and Judah, and 2 daughters, one named Mary and one named Salome. And his wife died. And after many years later, as a widower over 80, he took Mary. So this promotes the idea that the brothers and sisters of Jesus are actually half-brothers, that they're Joseph's thing. This early church father is the first source of that. But nowhere in this, it's talking about Joseph, the stepfather of Jesus, not Joseph of Arimathea. So they took a quote, confused who Joseph's, and then claimed it was their source. So far, every time we check back, trying to find where this originates, we get to that Robert de Boron, right? The claim that Joseph of Arimathea was Mary's uncle appears to originate in the medieval and modern legends, particularly in those tied to the Glastonbury traditions and the Holy Grail narratives, rather than authentic Talmudic sources. And then books like George F. Jowett's The Drama of the Lost Disciples, or E-Ring and Camp, The Traditions of Glastonbury, assert this connection, and their quote is according to the Talmud. They don't provide you a source in the Talmud because it doesn't exist, right? They don't give you the track date, the folio, or the quote. They just say, yeah, according to the Talmud, this is the case, right? And I'm suggesting to you that since an exhaustive search of the Talmud failed to find any such quote, that it is likely that this claim is completely fabricated to lend some historical credibility to Arthurian era stories about Joseph evangelizing Britain. Okay? When people make claims but fail to provide verifiable sources, it's my first red flag. Okay? That's why you see me. I always give you page numbers, book references, and do that. So you don't trust me, go look it up. It's there. I'll make your job easier. I'm going to tell you where to find it. Right? When they don't give me an exact reference, but enough information that allows me to do a search for the quote myself, like according to the Talmud, was enough to tell me I could search the Talmud for something similar to what they're claiming it's saying. And I can do an exhaustive search on electronic data. I mean, thank God for computer-assisted Bible studies. It has made my life so much easier. I used to do this in libraries, research libraries, with the card system and pulling out research books and ordering books into the library and doing it. It was extraordinarily time-consuming. To be able to search through entire collection of text, it saves me so much time it's not even funny. They further claim that Roman law required that the next of kin be the one to claim the crucified body. Okay, this was a harder search for me. Okay, this took more time. I found no source citing any explicit Roman law stating that only a next of kin could request the body of a crucified man. However, I did find a source saying it was customary to release bodies to family members, right? And I'm giving you the reference here, and the section's actually called on the body of the punished, right? You know, it's a 6th century AD compilation of Roman jurisprudence under Emperor Justinian, but he's drawing, even though it was compiled in the 6th century, they're quoting people like Oppian and Paulus, who are 2nd century people, 2nd to 3rd century, right? Now, Paulus expands on this idea, this general rule of releasing bodies to relatives by including anyone who asks. Bodies are not to be refused to their relatives, according to Oppian, nor to anyone who seeks them in burial. Right? This explicitly allows anybody indicating the discretion to give the body to someone beyond next of kin. Joseph of Arimathea was the wealthiest man in Jerusalem, according to tradition. He's a member of the Sanhedrin. He's a well-respected person in the thing. Him asking for the body, the fact that he had access to Pilate tells you he was higher up. He asked for the body according to the actual Roman laws that I could find and trace. No such law required him to be next of kin. So their argument that he had to be next of kin to claim the body falls apart once you try to check sources. And time and again, when I check references and I'm looking for primary sources, many of these legends all go back to the 2 books, Joseph of Arimathea, or the Histoire de Saint Grail, the History of the Holy Grail, which are both 13th century examples of medieval French literature. They are both, these are romance novels. These are fiction. They're both by Robert de Boron. Other times, Boron built upon existing Grail stories. The genre of medieval French romance literature, which is characterized by certain elements. It focuses on individual and personal growth. Unlike epics that focus on national or historical context, romances center on a single hero whose personal journey and moral development are central to the plot. Chivalry and courtly love. These narratives explore the chivalric code and the conduct for knights, bravery, honor, loyalty, and often feature themes of courtly love, where a knight idolizes a noble lady and performs deeds to prove his worthiness. You have quests and adventures. The plot is driven by a quest structure in which the hero embarks on a series of episodic adventures and challenges to achieve his goal, such as rescuing a damsel or finding a magic object. This is the style. This is typical of the genre of the book, and that's what you find in the Grail stories, right? The Holy Grail, as medieval French literature, has supernatural and probable elements like magic, miracles, mythical creatures like dragons, enchanted objects are often common in features in the literature, and the wonder serving as symbolic allegorical devices. And this is still what's typical in the in the genre. Moral and spiritual themes, while entertaining, these stories often incorporate ethical dilemmas, religious symbolism, providing moral instruction alongside escapism, like C.S. Lewis, the Screwtape's Letters, Chronicle or Narnia, those kind of things. They're to teach you stuff. The Holy Grail stories are core part of the genre, and specifically belonging to the Matter of Britain and Arthurian legends, right? The Arthurian legends started in France, they shifted to England, and they become distinctly, right? These stories have a French origin, they have a quest narrative, right? They have a spiritual dimension, and they have idealized heroes. Exactly what you would find in medieval French Romance literature. So the Holy Grail literature absolutely fixed this thing. Okay? And I just did a stream recently, last Friday, on it. I called it Advanced Hermeneutics, where I talked about the need to consider the genre in the book you are reading when you're doing interpretation. If you ignore the fact that these are fiction and that the medieval romance, French romance fiction, or that they end up becoming British Arthurian fiction, and you treat them as facts, you're going to end up with a confused idea of what they mean, right? So this is an example to me of people like the writers of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code took works of fiction, treated them as fact. They took them out of the context, right? The genre context they belong into, and they didn't. And when I went searching for any substance behind them, because just because you made up a fictional story, there could be some truth behind it, I found fabricated sources cited. I find interpretive norms common to the genre of the literature, it being the medieval French romance, ignored. What we didn't find is any primary sources cited, nor did we find any evidence backing up the claims, right? So that's the problem. When I'm trying to figure out what something is, and I do this level of research, and I can't find any substance, people tell me that something, oh, it's there behind the curtain, and I go behind the curtain and there's nothing there. It tells me they're just lying. I mean, they're people don't know squat. Now, the biblical narrative doesn't fill in a lot of details of Jesus' life from 12 to 30. But we find him living at Nazareth at age 12 and still living at Nazareth at age 30. The text gives us no hints of Jesus having moved away. If he was with Joseph of Arimathea, he would have either lived in Jerusalem. Nobody knows where Arimathea is, but a lot of scholars think it's in a town that might be Ramathan Zophim, which is near Jerusalem. Jesus is a Galilean consistently in the Bible. If he lived from the age, sometime after age 12 to 30 in Judea, right? They wouldn't be calling him a Galilean all the time. They wouldn't be talking about their accent coming out of Galilee, right? You live somewhere for 18 years, typically your accent goes away or it's greatly diminished. The stories of Jesus and Joseph of Arimathea traveling to Britain all originate in a genre of fiction known as medieval French romance. These romance novels get adopted into another genre of fiction called English Arthurian romance novels. And that's when these French novels take on a very, very English thing. And then other legends surrounding the Glastonbury Abbey will be circulated. In the next slides, I'm going to look at the Glastonbury tales. I told you I would do it later, and this is where we're going to fit in. So I go, okay, do we have any evidence here with around Glastonbury that supports this thing? So far, we've been striking out, right? So the legend of Joseph founding a church at Glastonbury potentially involved the young Jesus is a medieval invention that evolved over centuries, primarily to enhance the prestige and financial viability of Glastonbury Abbey. That's a big claim by me, and I'm going to try to back it up. I think the monks at Glastonbury Abbey promoted a lie to get money for their church and to keep fame and to do that stuff. And the core legend that Joseph traveled to Britain was established in Christianity there first emerged in the early 12th century AD, but it was not initially tied to Glastonbury or a specific first century church built by him, let alone with Jesus' help. The earliest textual reference appears in William of Malmesbury's on the antiquity of the church at Glastonbury. That's his French name, but it's on about that Glastonbury, written about 1125 to 1135 AD. This work, William describes Glastonbury's old church as a simple wattle and dab structure, as the earliest Christian church in Britain, possibly founded by an unnamed disciple of Christ or their immediate followers shortly after Jesus' death. William does not name Joseph of Arimathea, doesn't say him and Jesus built this wattle house, any of that stuff. Those get added in later manuscripts in the 12th and 13th century, but they're not in the original story. So why would monks at an abbey make up such a lie? Well, they had a fire in 1188-4 that destroyed the church, completely burned it out. They needed donations to rebuild the abbey and the church, and they needed do that. So this happens in 1184, and then by 1191, they managed to find the grave of King Arthur there, and the stories circulated that that church was built upon the site of a house that Jesus and Joseph built. Joseph of Arimathea first, and then he just added Jesus in there after. Money was pouring into the abbey. People wanted to support it. Hey, if this is the first above ground church in Christianity, and it's built on the site of Jesus had his own house built when he traveled with Joseph of Arimathea, we don't want to see it left in ruins. Let's give them money, rebuild this thing. Historical records indicate the Glastonbury Abbey construction spans century, with the first church built there around 700 AD, not 100 AD or 50 AD or 20 AD, 700, under King Ian. It was significantly rebuilt in the 10th century, okay, that's in the 900s, and then largely destroyed by fire in 1184, leading to a major rebuilding, not only rebuilding and expansion of this abbey, right? Later additions and changes, continuing until its suppression in 1539. So the money kept coming in for the next 400 years based on these myths. Follow the money, right? The story gets expanded in the late 12th century with a source we have already discussed, Robert de Boron's medieval French romance novels, Joseph of Arimathea, right? So look at the dates, 1191 to 1202. They needed money. They start this rumor. Boron adds it in his books, which portrayed Joseph as the guardian of the Holy Grail, the cup from the Last Supper used to collect the blood of Jesus after the crucifixion, and claims that he brought it to Britain, settling at Glastonbury. The legend is tied to the broader Arthurian Grail quest popular at the time. By the 14th century, the Chronicle of the Glastonbury Abbey explicitly dated the foundation of the church at AD 63. Now, history says 700 AD, but the church went back and wrote its own history and has the church being founded in 63 AD. Any of this start to smell suspicious to you? Like somebody is maybe not being truthful? They not only did that, they claimed that Joseph's staff, when Joseph brought his staff there, he stuck it in the ground and it sprouted. It was a thorn bush, right? And it created a tree. You can go to the Glastonbury Abbey. The stump of that tree is there, and they've planted a new one to replace it. Okay, this is supposed to be Joseph's staff, right? And where this embellishment comes from is the abbot Richard Beer, and he wrote a book, The Life of Joseph of Arimathea. Okay, and he introduced Joseph's role as a merchant traveling to Britain, right? And this is that tin merchant idea, and added the miracle of the staff blooming at Glastonbury thorn tree upon planting it on Wayfarer Hill. Okay, this is another myth that they still promote, that tree was Joseph of Arimathea's staff. All of this stuff is coming out of Glastonbury Abbey, an abbey that needed money, claimed to have all these discoveries, kind of the Ron Wyatt of their day, right? Found all this stuff, King Arthur's grave, and Joseph of Arimathea's staff turned into this miraculous bush, and it's a place Jesus built the church. This is, none of this even smells true, right? The specific element of young Jesus helping Joseph build a home or accompanying him are even later additions. They don't show up in any of these medieval texts. It stems from an apocryphal idea that Joseph was Jesus' uncle or great uncle via Mary, and a merchant who brought the adolescent Jesus on a tin trading voyage during Jesus' lost years. This is within the last 150 years. Okay? The notion has no textual basis before the 19th to 20th centuries and was popularized in William Blake's poem, 1804 poem, and did those feet in ancient time. It's the later name of this poem is called Jerusalem. And it poetically suggests that Jesus walked on England's green and pleasant land. A guy wrote a poem, suggested Jesus was there, and from that poem we built this whole history. And Blake drew from earlier traditions of Joseph preaching in Britain after Jesus' death, not with him as a child. Folklore scholars have tried to trace this back, and the accompanying visit story is a modern embellishment, possibly influenced by 7th to 18th century Romanticism, but not explicitly found earlier than the 20th century. Okay? So there's no early support for this. The Glastonbury stuff is striking out just like everything else we checked. Now, I can't say with absolute certainty that Jesus wasn't related to Joseph of Arimathea. I can't say yes or no. Or that Jesus never became his ward or traveled with Joseph to Britain. What I can tell you is that the evidence points to all these stories being invented as part of medieval French fiction that began in about 1190 AD and evolved into English Arthurian romance novels, and they appeared to have been embellished by the Glastonbury tales, right, where the Glastonbury Abbey monks had a financial interest in promoting the myths. As Christian fiction, they paint a beautiful legend pointing to the true cup, Christ's blood, in the Eucharist. But like I said, the Screwtape Letters and the Chronicles of Narnia and more than a dozen other Christian fiction books by C.S. Lewis are wonderful Christian fiction. But we wouldn't mistake them for nonfiction. You don't go start looking for Narnia, right? So why are these stories of medieval French fiction and Arthurian romance novels being taken as nonfiction? And I'm suggesting because we want them to be true. The Tales of the Holy Grail are some of the most successful pieces of Christian fiction after because we all want the stories to be true. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they were? that makes it easy to sell, right? And that's what's going on here. You got people that are trying to sell you stories that have no basis in fact, and they promote them. And then when you have streamers that need content, and suddenly they go out there and start promoting these, and they get a lot of clicks. I tell you right now, I get more listeners on Friday than any time I'm doing the Bible. I'll go back and I'll see the stream report after I get off the air, and my numbers will have doubled today over normal. If I do the book of Enoch, they'll go up 4 or 5 times. If I start speculating on Revelation, they go up. Because that's what drives clicks, that drives interest. So this is what happens. Streamers see something. Grail stories are always good. Hidden conspiracy theories are even better. And they go out and they promote them. And that's what we have here. So I'm already like 22 minutes over, but I am going to put on a song. I'm going to try to read the chat. I'll see what I can get and see if hopefully I don't miss a question today. I missed one, I guess, on the other day. And I will try to do that. But I'll be back in a minute after reading the chat and see if I can talk to you some more. Thanks. Okay, we're back, and I don't always take time to thank everybody. Beach Bum Mermaid, wow, over the top. Thank you very much for the support. And Rick Roll's always sharing my links. Revolver's always in there making sure the chat stay good. All you people that are do this, what do you call it? I just drew a blank on her name, but people that share the stream. I seen Holy Moly shared the stream over on X, and I'm very thankful to all of you that support me in that way. I don't ask for financial support, but when it comes, it's appreciated. It really is appreciated. People that don't do financial support but are here and just in the chat and talking and or sharing and liking the stream, it blesses me, and it makes it worth doing this research. But I'm glad that some of you caught just how much work this is for me. The amount of research it took me to put the stream together wasn't minor. I mean, thank God for computers. I was able to do it faster. This would have taken me months. When I used to do a lot of research, I would spend months in the library doing this kind of stuff. This is so much easier in a computer age. Now you can't trust computers either. Like I said, when I do searches, I've explained this with AI before. When I'm asking it for search through stuff, I had a page and a half of text I got to give AI to tell it not to lie to me. I want to verify the source. I wanted to double verify and only scholarly records and do all that. I mean, I had to do this trial and error. But that's still way easier than the old way with the little card file. My God. And if you'd not, what was that? The Dewey Decimal System that we had in the card file? Oh, it's horrible. And for looking up books. And so we have it. But this is, and yeah, people have lied to us for a lot longer than 400 years about stuff, right? But this is, you have people, when you see somebody that has a financial motivation, interest, and you're going, well, could they be lying? And then you find out they made money because you believe the lie. Like people that might have been promoting a jab and making a lot of money off of that jab, that they might have been lying about the effectiveness of that jab and the safety of that jab, kind of stuff. You don't have to go back to ancient history. This happens today, right? And when somebody has a financial interest, that's my first thing is, wait a second. Are they telling me because they really believe it, or are they telling me because they're making money, right? What's going on? And that's why I always do this, that I don't ask for anything. I don't put anything behind a paywall. I will make my notes available to you for free. If somebody out of the goodness of their heart wants to support me, I am very blessed by that. Very blessed. But don't ever think it's required, because I never want to do this about money. It's one reason I never wanted to go into professional ministry, when I didn't feel called by God, but I never wanted to be what I was doing for God to be about money. I want to make my own money. I'll go be an electrical contractor. I'll do whatever, I did a lot of stuff to make money, but I didn't want to sell the gospel. The gospel's free, and the truth is free. And so that's there. So I don't want to ramble too long, because I know we already went over. So if you're new here, like the channel, like where I'm at. If you're on Rumble, YouTube, DLive, Foxhole, wherever you're listening, like it, support it, share it. I'm Donahue Pop on most places. Rumble, X, DLive. It says Twitter on my card, but the card was before it became X. And then when I went to Pilled, I messed up Donahue Papa, and I became Bill Donahue on Pilled. And when I finally went to YouTube, I couldn't get any of the names I asked for, so they picked Discerning Truth 534. And so you're here. And then on Tuesdays, I visit Neil. I love Neil. She got upset last time because I called her a teacher, or said she was teaching. Neil doesn't think of herself as a teacher, but I learn sometimes, often from her chat. And she'll ask questions and look at something in a different way than I looked at it. And I learn from her. So anybody can be a teacher. You don't just have to go to Bible college or doing that stuff. They can be your teacher. And I love that. And then, like I said, if you're listening to a replay or you have a question that you think of after, just email me, bill@discerningtruths.com. It might be your question or maybe even a comment that we discussed in your question that triggers a study like this, right? And then, like I said, after we get off the air, give me a few minutes. I will create a PDF out of those slides and I'll upload it to Discerning Truth Scripts on Telegram. You can download all my information. It's yours to keep and use as you want. If you're listening on Rumble or YouTube, those are easiest places. This will be under Freaky Fridays. I have a Freaky Friday channel on Rumble and a Freaky Friday playlist on YouTube, and that's where you're going to find this stream. I will save it there, and then like it. If you're on YouTube, just like in Discerning Truth 534 is fine. If you're on Rumble, they want you to like all of the channels. I have 14 channels underneath my name, Donahue Papa. I have Start Here, New Testament books, Old Testament books, Freaky Friday. There's 14 of them. I have way more playlists on YouTube, but YouTube doesn't make you go in and like all the playlists. You like the channel, you're fine. Rumble wants you to like each individual channel, pain in the butt. But if you're inspired to do that, I appreciate that. And then share it. Just share these links with your friends. Maybe your friends have heard from people teaching them this nonsense. And then I always promote my good friend Michael Beatty, California. Michael was he's in the 2 Timothy, and he's traveling right now. Had to go back, and him and Dilly had another meeting, and they can share publicly what this is about when and the amount they're ready. I'm just telling you good things. God's blessing on what they've been doing. And they'll bless the whole meme team. They put in the fight for a long time with no reward other than satisfaction. And it looks like they're going to be rewarded. But he teaches the Bible 6 days a week, right? Monday to Friday, he'll be in Timothy, or if he finishes Timothy, he'll do another book. He just got him out of Lamentations. And then on Sunday, his wife Linda joins him, and they do Psalms. He normally prays for the nation on Wednesday, but Wednesday he was traveling, so we didn't get any prayer for the nation last Wednesday. But I suspect it'll be back again next week. So with that, thank you all for showing up, and thank you for the support and the encouragement, the comments, everything that you do. And with that, I'm going to get out of here and try to get something done today. This is a long stream for me. God bless you all. I'm out of here.